The end of the academic year is more than just a career milestone, it's also the perfect time for a financial check in. Keep listening as I walk through key financial, career, and administrative tasks that physicians should be thinking about right now. Whether you are graduating from training, starting your first attending job, or you're an established physician looking to optimize your finances, this mid year reset will help to protect your income, maximize your benefits, and make sure you're on track for the life and wealth you're trying to build. Hello, and welcome to the Wealth Minded MD podcast with your money best friend. I'm Dr. Lisha Taylor, and of course, I'm here to help you build wealth and make good money decisions so you can create the life you desire with more control over your time. As physicians, one of the most important things that we can do is make sure that we secure our income. That means that if we were, for some reason, unable to work due to a car accident, a medical illness, a chronic condition, mental health disorder, that we still have money coming in. Because a lot of our financial plans are contingent on our high doctor income. And so one of the things that you will need to do is make sure that you get long-term disability insurance. And I know, as well as anybody, that getting this is not necessarily fun, and all insurance agents are not created equal. However, Pradeep Otto and his team at PKA Insurance Group are different. They are who you want to contact if you need long-term disability insurance or life insurance. They have a reputation of putting people over profits and always doing what's best. If you're in need of life insurance or disability insurance, be sure to reach out to Pradeep and his team today. They will help you get the insurance you need with the service you deserve. All right, y'all, you may have noticed it's just me on the episode. I know if you listened to the podcast last week, Brittany and I were talking about podcast transition, right? She's got these amazing opportunities and cool gigs and all of the things, which I'm very excited about for her. But that also means that I'm going to be doing a little revamp of the podcast, if you will. And I wanted to talk about that today. So it's going to include a few things. One, you're going to hear my lovely voice, or at least hopefully you think it's bearable, on some solo episodes. And I'll be doing some solo episodes on various financial topics or things that are sort of coming up, if you will. I'll also incorporate a few different travel episodes. I travel a lot, whether it's to remote islands like the Maldives or domestic trips like Las Vegas, or some upcoming trips that I already have planned with my girlfriends or with my family. And some of these require a ton of planning and credit card utilization and all of this stuff, and others of them do not. Some of them I might take with my significant other, others I might take with some of my friends from high school or from residency or from med school. And so you'll get the gamut and you'll get a sense for how I book various different trips, what I liked, didn't like, the work involved, or maybe if there was minimal work involved. So anyway, I'll do some solo podcasts on different financial topics. I'll sprinkle in some travel episodes as I am planning different super fun, cool trips. You will also hear a few interviews that I'm going to do with a few different physicians, whether it's on their career and some of the cool things that they're doing in this space, and also maybe even some non-physicians. And then lastly, I wanted to start this new series where we bring different physicians and high income earners on to give us a little glimpse into their world. So I would love to interview people and talk to them about different ways that they are making money. Maybe it's through a traditional job, and what is that job and what is that like? Or maybe it's through some really cool side gig, or maybe it's through some crazy different investment that we never would have thought of. But anyway, talk to them about how they are making money, how they are spending money. Maybe they bought this really cool house. Maybe they have a really nice car. Maybe they're paying for their kids' college education. So talk to them about how they're making money, how they're spending money, how they are investing money, and you'll get the gamut. Some folks probably have no idea and they hired a financial advisor, and we'll talk about their process for hiring said financial advisor. And other folks are more DIY. They do it themselves, and we will get a glimpse into what their portfolio looks like, what things they're investing in, what percentage they're saving versus investing, whether or not they have an emergency fund and what that might look like. And then also how they're giving money away. We'll hear about some of their biggest money mistakes and how they rectified them, and some of the money goals that they may have for the future. But essentially, I wanted this to be a safe space where people can come on and kind of give us a glimpse into their world. And I am hoping that not only you, but also myself can be inspired by some of the stories of people who have different careers or in different specialties or are investing in different ways, right? So we can all glean from them, learn from them, and maybe take some tidbits away from them that we can incorporate into our own lives. So very excited to start all of that stuff. As you can see, I'm full of bright ideas, but hopefully that is something that you are interested in. And if you are interested in coming on to talk to me about different ways that you are making money, or or investing money or saving money or giving money or money mistakes, feel free to shoot me an email and maybe we can set something up. Our podcast email is wealthmindedmd@gmail.com. Again, wealthmindedmd@gmail.com. And I cannot wait to get started with all of that. All right. For today's financial focus, I actually wanted to talk about different transitions that we make in our careers. And this came to a head because, as most of you know, I work in academic medicine, which means I work at a medical school. And that means I work with learners, right? People who are in medical school or PA school or nursing school, and also people who have finished school and are still in training. So residents, fellows, that sort of thing. And recently, around this time of the year, at least at the time of this recording, they were getting ready to graduate. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, why don't I create this sort of graduating resident fellow checklist? And then I realized it really wasn't only applicable to residents and fellows, but really was applicable to anybody in transition. So anybody who might be leaving a job or thinking about leaving a job, anybody who is finishing training, or maybe you're just progressing to that next year in training. This is around the time of the year where we usually do that. And I figured, you know what? The checklist that I created for them might be applicable or helpful to this podcast audience as well. So I figured I would kind of go through some of the things on that checklist and just make sure that we are all on the same page about what we should be doing in sort of this mid-year point. So I'm going to get started. So the first thing is like why career transitions create some sort of risk or create a time for us to even need this check-in. And my main point here is that most doctors kind of focus on the job offer or they're really excited about what's next, but there are dozens of other little details that come whenever you are changing jobs or finishing training that you want to make sure that you are aware of and you've planned for. For example, during this graduation season, people are getting ready to start new jobs, right? But that also typically comes with relocation expenses, especially if you're starting a job in a different city. Usually it comes with delayed paychecks. Some people are what we call in arrears. I don't know if you've heard of that term before, but it's essentially where usually when you start a new job, you don't get paid right away. And that means when you leave a job, you essentially get like an extra paycheck, if you will. And so you might be in arrears, meaning you might get that one last paycheck from your job even after you've finished working there. But then when you start the new job, they might put you into arrears again. It's more of a accounting thing, if you will. And so there may be a delay. That's my point. There may be a delay on when you get your next paycheck. And so you need to be aware of when you're going to get paid again. So you know when you're going to have some more money entering your bank account. You also need to be aware of how you are paid. And I have experienced the whole gamut of this. When I was in training, we got paid monthly. And that was a little bit challenging, right? You splurge a little bit too much on one paycheck and then you got to figure it out until the next month. So when I was in training, I got paid monthly. Now I get paid every 2 weeks. So every other Friday, I know I've got a paycheck coming in, which is fantastic. Some of my side gigs, for example, when I used to work for the urgent care, we actually got paid twice a month, which sounds similar, but is actually different from getting paid every 2 weeks. So we got paid on, I think it was the 1st and the 15th. And so you could get a paycheck in the middle of the week. If it fell on the 15th or if it fell on a holiday, you might get the paycheck early or a little bit later. So it just really depends. But essentially, when you are in transition, you need to make sure that you realize or are aware of when you're going to get these paychecks. And if your new job or the place that you are transitioning into, if it comes with any relocation expenses or maybe even just a sign-on bonus, you want to make sure that you are crystal clear on when you are going to receive that money. Because sometimes you might think, oh, I'm going to receive it with my first paycheck. That's your assumption. And really, that's not the case. Or maybe you and your immediate boss knew that you were getting a sign-on bonus, but the HR or the human resources department was not aware. And so they haven't gotten that memo. And so you want to make sure that you are aware of when money is coming in and leaving your account. The other thing is that whenever you are in transition, it usually comes with some administrative headaches. I don't know about you, but if you've ever gotten credentialed at a job, which I'm pretty sure most of us has, that it comes with a ton of emails with different administrators asking for what seems like redundant information. And so you want to make sure that you are aware of all of the things that you have to give them and send them and that you keep everything in a safe place. So anyway, a lot of these career transitions come with some sort of financial and administrative to-dos. All right, so the first thing that was on that checklist that I gave to the residents and the fellows who were finishing our program, at least where I am, is that they needed to save important information. This was something that was not very clear to me when I finished my residency, but was very clear to me when I finished my fellowship. And I want this to be the case for anybody, whether you are switching jobs or maybe staying in your same job. You want to make sure that you are saving important information, especially if you work in academia or you're finishing a training program, because usually that means that you have your own email address that is connected to your job. So if you are in residency, you have an email address that's connected to your job. If you are an academic physician, you have an email address that's connected to your job. Even if you're not a physician, right? let's say you are a lawyer or a pharmacist or whatever, you usually will have a work email. That's pretty standard, right? The problem is that when you leave that job or when you finish your training, you lose access to that email. And you might be like, well, I don't really care. I don't really need that email. Maybe you probably have like a Gmail or a Yahoo or whatever other email accounts that you can utilize for personal reasons, and that is fine. However, I cannot stress enough the importance of saving important emails. It is especially important email addresses. As a physician, I know that by virtue of being in school for a gazillion years and doing all of these different training programs, I know a lot of doctors. And one of the things you want to make sure is that you keep in contact with them, or you have a way to stay in contact with them, because you might need them sooner than you realize. Whenever you are starting a new job, usually they require some sort of reference. And sometimes that reference is from your prior boss, but oftentimes it's a peer reference. And so you're going to need to give them your peer's email address. And your peer might be a little ticked off if you give them their personal email or their personal cell phone number. And so you want to make sure that you get your peer's work emails. Also, if there are like attending physicians or colleagues that you're really close to that maybe you want to contact in the future for whatever reason, another job opportunity, a cool project that you want to collaborate on, or you just want to ask them career advice, you want a way to contact them. And if you're going to immediately lose access to your work email, you're not going to have a way to contact them. So you're going to want to save their work email. And what I would do when I finished my fellowship is actually I wrote down the name of every single physician and their email address that was in my department. And I actually just like saved it in a folder. And then I also, if I had their personal cell phone numbers, if I had their personal email accounts, then I would put that in the folder as well. Now, technology has progressed. You might be able to save all of their information in your cell phone, which is great if you can do that. But their work emails especially, I made sure that I had that in a safe place so that if I ever needed to contact them for anything or list their name and their email address as a reference or what have you, that I had a way to contact them. And so I can't stress that enough. Save or forward important email addresses. The other thing that I wish I had done actually starting in medical school, but I didn't realize its importance until after I'd finished all of my training, was connecting with some of your colleagues and associates on social media. Now, maybe your social media is super private, or maybe you're not even into social media, but some sort of platform, maybe it's Doximity, which is kind of like the LinkedIn for doctors, or maybe it's just LinkedIn, have a way to connect with them and keep them in your network. Again, you will never know when you might need them. Maybe you're thinking about like, oh, I wish I knew an ENT. I want to ask an ENT doctor something, right? And you forgot that like in your med school class, 5 people matched in the ENT. Like you could easily reach out to them. They know you personally. You know what I'm saying? Or if you get a job opportunity, you want to ask them their advice. Or maybe they work for a cool company that you would love to work for. Or maybe they have a really cool side gig that you would love to get into and pick their brains about. Like, don't lose access to the network that you worked so hard to build. So in addition to forwarding important emails that you might want to keep to your personal email, in addition to saving work emails of colleagues, you might also want to connect with some of your colleagues on social media or some sort of networking platform like LinkedIn or Doximity. And if you haven't done so already, I would encourage you to do that. Periodically, I will get these email notifications saying that somebody that I went to med school with wants to connect with me on Doximity or LinkedIn, and I always accept them. Now, I'm not on LinkedIn or Doximity that much, but I always want to make sure that I'm continuing to build my network. Again, you never know when that might come into play. And right now, you have access to tons of people that are in your same career field or subspecialty or whatever. And so you don't want to lose access to them. And so I would encourage you to take the time to update your LinkedIn profile if it's not up to date, or make a Doximity profile if you don't already have one, and connect with people that way. All right. The other thing, in addition to doing that, is saving your procedure logs. So as someone who is family medicine and sports medicine, I was actually surprised at how helpful this was. So, family medicine, we kind of are trained in the gamut of everything from like birth control insertion, so like an IUD insertion or an Explanade insertion, to like biopsies, skin tags. As a sports doc, I do a lot of procedures, but I didn't realize that for credentialing for some places, they want to make sure that you actually know how to do that stuff. And so they might actually ask for a copy of your procedure logs. I don't remember if it was when I was starting my fellowship or maybe when I was starting the job that I have now, but one of them actually asked for my procedure logs. I was surprised. And if you are in a surgical specialty, I believe that is not uncommon. And so if you are someone who is in training or you're not in training and you have a regular job and you're thinking about transitioning, periodically save some of your procedure logs so you have proof of some of the things that you know how to do. And in addition to that, that also means saving and downloading some of your certificates. So if you have a certification in something, you want to make sure that you save that, because again, the credentialing offices at a lot of these places are going to ask for that, whether it's your BLS basic life support certificates, ACLS certificates, whether, if you know how to do CPR on a newborn, that's a different certification certification. I forget the name of it off the top of my head. But all of these things, if you've gotten any work training, right? If you've gotten training in, I don't know, ultrasound or how to use artificial intelligence and you've gotten any sort of certification, you want to make sure that you save a copy of that stuff. And what I would do is what I realized I needed to start doing to make things easier for myself is to essentially create a medical credentialing folder, or if you're not in medicine, an attorney credentialing folder, whatever you want to call it, but essentially some folder on your computer or maybe in a Google Drive or whatever, where you literally keep all of this information. So you want to keep a copy of all of your diplomas. You want to keep a copy of your certificates. You want to keep a copy of your certifications. You want to keep a copy of maybe a transcript or so. I would also keep insurance information. So malpractice insurance. This is a big one. So when you are finishing training or you're switching jobs, the new job that you are starting is going to want to know that you have some sort of malpractice documentation so that if some patient, some customer, whatever sues you, they know that you are covered from your prior place of employment. And so you need to make sure you have a copy of it. And I am always shocked at how many of them still ask for my malpractice insurance from when I was in training, which I'm like, really? You still need that? But essentially, the answer at most places is yes. And so what you want to do is make sure that you have a copy of it. So if you are somebody who is in residency or fellowship and you are finishing your training program, make sure that you ask the Human Resources Department or look on your company website and download a copy of your malpractice insurance information, because you will be surprised how many people will ask you for it. And I'm going to give you a little word of advice is that whenever I am being credentialed or hired on at a new place, whether it's a main job or a side gig or whatever, I am constantly frustrated by how many people ask me for the same information multiple times. I'm sure you are too. But having all of this stuff in a folder makes everything so much easier to upload into their random portals, to give to certain administrators, even if they're asking you for the same information. All right. So first word of advice is to save important information. And that includes forwarding emails, getting work contacts, connecting with people on networking platforms, saving any procedure logs and certifications, and making sure that you obtain a copy of any malpractice documentation you may have. The next word of advice, or the next sort of category, was to not leave money on the table. And that basically means that you are crystal clear on the money that you are supposed to get and how you can benefit from any of the perks that might be available to you before you leave your place of employment. All right. And so one of the things that I was telling all the residents and the fellows is PSLF, right? Public Service Loan Forgiveness for their student loans. Maybe you are working in a job that doesn't qualify for federal student loan forgiveness. But if you are, this is really important. And sometimes you may think my job doesn't qualify, and then later it ends up qualifying for some reason, or maybe you switch jobs and the new job that you switch into qualify. So I would keep this documentation, even if you're not even sure if you're going to pursue public service loan forgiveness. Remember, this is the program that will forgive your loans after you make 10 years of qualifying payments. Oftentimes your time in training, working for an academic institution, a governmental institution, a nonprofit institution will count. Actually, I know somebody who they went to residency at a for-profit institution, and then later that institution was bought out by a nonprofit and they got credit for all of those years of training. And so anyway, my point here is to make sure that you have your employer fill out that employer certification form. When I was in training, it was like a mess. You had to print out the form, you had to hand sign it, you couldn't sign it online. It was a whole thing. But now they have revamped it. It's 2026. They have revamped their process. And so now you can do a lot of this stuff online. And the form does not take that long. I think you can Google studentaid.gov/PSLF and it will take you to that quote unquote help tool. And you can put in your employer, you put in your basic information like your full name, social security number, address, phone number, email, that sort of thing. You put in how many hours a week you worked. The requirement is you have to work at least 30 hours a week. You put in how many hours a week you work, your employer website. I think they ask you for like somebody who can vouch for you. And it doesn't have to be the CEO of the company or like the head of the graduate medical education department or the president of the university. Literally, when I was in training, I got my program coordinator to sign the form. When I was getting credit for some payments that I had made when I was working for a nonprofit institution, this is before I went to medical school, I just got somebody that worked there to vouch for me and sign this form. But anyway, you put their name, their email address in there. They get an automatic email. They're like, yeah, I know this person. Yep, she worked the hours that she said she worked for this organization during the time period that she stated, and then it gets processed. Yes, you can do a manual form, but I find that if you fill out and try to upload one of those manual forms, sometimes it takes a long time to process. And it's just easier for the Department of Education to process these PSLF forms whenever you do them mainly online using the help tool. So that's what I would encourage you to do. And if you are somebody who is changing jobs, I would encourage you to fill out that form so that you can make sure that you get credit for those months that you are in training. Even if you are in the save debacle where your loans were on pause or on forbearance for, I don't know, the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years or whatever, because of all the stuff happening in the government, and maybe you don't even have credit for those payments because they told you they weren't going to count or those months weren't going to count, I would still encourage you to fill out this form certifying that you worked for a qualifying employer during this period. Because my experience has been that when different leaders get into public office, aka when there tends to be, just in full transparency, a Democrat in the White House, they tend to right the wrongs of the prior administration and give all these leniencies and all of these credits to people who were kind of taken advantage of or screwed over in the past, for lack of a better word. And so even though right now they're saying, hey, anytime in the save forbearance is not going to count towards public service loan forgiveness, they may change their mind and say, we're going to count everybody. Or if a Democrat gets elected into office during the next presidential election. And so my advice to you is to fill out that form and at least have it down and certified that you worked for a qualifying employer during this time, because maybe they might retroactively allow you to get credit for some of these months, aka the buyback program and all of that. This will not be a student loan episode. I'm actually going to record a separate student loan episode, probably with Brittany soon. She couldn't stay away from the podcast that long, so we'll probably be recording a student loan episode or something. I know that there's a lot of confusion and things are in flux with student loans, so we will record a separate episode on that at some point, probably maybe this week or so. But just for the purposes of this episode, though, I want you to make sure that you get your public service loan forgiveness forms signed, even if you're not even in transition, right? If it's been a few months or even a year since you've last gotten this form signed by somebody at your job, this is your sign to get them to re-sign it. In fact, I'm going to tell myself to do this too. It might have been a year since I last uploaded this form, so I'm going to do this as well. All right. The other thing with not leaving money on the table is clarifying sign-on bonuses, relocation stipends, that sort of thing. So any money that you are supposed to be receiving from your new institution or your new employer, please make sure that you are aware of when that is going to happen. The other thing that I was telling some of the graduates, because they were like, Lisha, I need money. And so one of the things that I was telling them is to utilize this time and think creatively about how you might be able to get some extra money. I talked about how when I graduated from medical school, I asked my parents if they would throw me a graduation party. And they were like, yeah, sure, we can throw you a party. So what I did is I got on like Shutterfly or Canva or something, and I made these invitations like Lisha's graduation party, and I printed them out in color and I literally mailed them like physical invitations. I know right now they have all these different platforms where you can essentially text somebody an invitation. I find that a lot of people ignore those, so I'm not a huge fan. For, my med school graduation, I actually had a physical, like the equivalent of like a postcard in color, graduation party invitation on it. And I mailed it out like, yes, licking stamps, closing envelopes, mailed it to essentially everybody that I ever knew growing up. Like every member of my church, like all of these people, I invited them to my quote unquote graduation party. And I knew the vast majority were not going to come. But what most people do when they receive a physical invitation in the mail to a party is they send you back an envelope with a card and some money in it. And so that's essentially what I did. And I ended up collecting like thousands of dollars in graduation money when I graduated from medical school. And so I'm not saying for you to do that, but I'm just letting you know that that's what I did. And that was one of the ways that I was able to kind of get some money and celebrate with folks. And so maybe you might want to think of something similar. So the next thing is to protect your income. So what do I mean by this? As a physician, and maybe you're a high income earner who's not in medicine, I still firmly believe in this. You want to make sure that you're protecting your money, the money that you have already, even if you have a negative net worth, and then more importantly, the money that you are going to be making. As somebody who makes 6 figures or more per year, you are going to build a high net worth, hopefully. And you want to make sure that you're protecting not only the money that you're going to be saving and investing over time, but the money that you're making and your ability to make said amount of money. And that means you need disability insurance, right? So if you get disabled, right, you get in a bad car accident, or, maybe you get diagnosed with a medical condition that prevents you from being able to work, you get diagnosed with cancer, you have an essential tremor, you have something that prevents you from being able to do your job and your specialty the way that you currently do it, in the capacity that you currently do it, meaning full-time, that you have a way to still make money. And disability insurance is that way. If you get disabled, you can't work full-time, they will pay you out a monthly check every month. They will give you money each month, essentially, to be able to support yourself until you go back to work full-time. And the studies show that 1 in 7 physicians end up needing disability insurance at some point in their career. And so if you happen to be one of those 1 in 7, you want to make sure that you have a big paycheck coming in. A lot of physicians will get a disability insurance payout that will pay them $5,000 or $10,000 a month if they get disabled. So that if that happens to them, it will already be, I'm sure, a very challenging and stressful time, but at least you won't have to worry about money during that time. And so make sure that you have your own disability insurance coverage. Yes, you may get some for free from your prior employer, from your new employer, from your current employer, but usually those group policies that you get for your employer are very different than like what you could get on your own. They have a different definition of disability. They may not pay you out if you can still do do another job. They may not pay you out if you can still work part-time. They may not even start paying you until 6 or 7 months pass. Like, it's very different than if you have your own individual policy that is with you no matter where you work and that will pay you out starting at the 3-month mark if you are disabled and unable to work full-time. So anyway, make sure you get disability insurance. Make sure it's own occupation, specialty specific, that sort of thing. Make sure you get term life insurance if you need life insurance. Not everybody needs life insurance. If you are unmarried, if you do not have children, if you do not have people in your family that you support financially, then maybe you don't need life insurance. But if you are married, if you do have children, if there are people that you support financially, make sure that you are considering some sort of life insurance. A lot of people will get some amount for free through their job, but usually when you switch jobs, that policy lapses. Maybe your new job will also give you coverage, and if so, that is fantastic, but I find that mostly the coverage that you get from your job is insufficient. Most jobs will pay you out 2 times your salary up to some cap, but usually the rule of thumb is that you need 10 to 12 times your income in life insurance, and so you just want to make sure that you have enough, and you might be able to stack what you get through your job with what you might be able to purchase on your own through an individual policy. I won't harp on this too long. I know we've had recent episodes on this topic, but I wanted to make sure that you are aware of that. The other thing is to make sure that you have health insurance coverage. And this is something that I spend a lot of time helping residents and fellows with because I don't think it's something that they realize they're going to need until they need it. And then I inevitably get a lot of frantic emails like, Lisha, what should I do? And so let me break this down. Whenever you are switching jobs, if you get your health insurance through your job, which 99% of us do, then you're also going to lose your health insurance coverage when you quit your job or when your job ends, including when you finish training. So if you're a resident finishing training, if you're a fellow finishing training, if you're somebody who is transitioning jobs or thinking about transitioning jobs, you might lose your health insurance coverage when you do the switch. Alternatively, if you are somebody who is maybe not switching jobs, but let's say you're going from full-time to part-time, make sure that you are aware the minimum amount that you need to work each month or each week in order to qualify for benefits, because you might cut down to part-time, like 50% time, and then that may not qualify you for different insurances. Different jobs do it differently. Some jobs say you have to work at least 0.6 time in order to qualify for employee benefits, including health insurance. Other jobs are a little bit more lax and it's like 0.3. So make sure you talk to your human resources department before you make any changes to your work hours regarding health insurance. But you need to figure out what you're going to do for health insurance. What most people end up doing is activating something called COBRA. COBRA is essentially the federal law that allows you to maintain your current health insurance even once you leave your employer. However, usually what that means is that you have to pay the full cost. So when you're an employee at a place, usually your employer is paying like 80 or 90% of the cost of your health insurance premium, and you're paying the remainder. Now, that remainder may still be a lot of money, but trust me, if you're paying the full cost, you're going to realize how expensive it is. When I was in fellowship, actually, I didn't pay anything for health insurance. I think they covered the full cost. And then when we were about to finish our training and we got the COBRA paperwork from the human resources department, they were like, hey, if you want to maintain this health coverage, you have to pay for the full cost on your own. And the full cost for a single person who's fairly healthy, who at that time was in her early 30s, was like $1,000 a month. And I was like, what? That was my first sort of reality check of how expensive health insurance was, because I had not really paid for it before. So anyway, my point is that COBRA is expensive. COBRA is that law, again, that allows you to maintain your current employer's health insurance coverage. The problem is it will no longer be subsidized by your employer because you don't work there anymore. And so you would have to pay the full cost, and that full cost is extremely expensive. If you are married, if you've got kids that you also need health insurance for, it's going to be even more expensive. So what do? Right? So you have a few options. One of the things to keep in mind is that COBRA can be activated retroactively. What does that mean? That means that essentially you have 2 months from when you leave your job to when you have to activate COBRA if you want it. And so what you can do is like essentially not pay for the COBRA health insurance coverage for the first 2 months. And then if something happens and you like get hit by a bus or something, you can activate it retroactively and it will still cover you. But that only lasts for like the first 60 days or the first 2 months. So essentially what I tell a lot of people to do is technically, I guess you're kind of uninsured, but you're like going without health coverage for the first 2 months when you leave your job. And then if something happens and you need to activate COBRA, you can activate it retroactively and it will cover you, which is fantastic, right? You just need to make sure that you have the paperwork ready to submit in case something happens to you. So essentially you get 2 months of coverage for free is what I'm saying. Now, obviously, if you have to activate COBRA, you would have to pay for the months that you're trying to activate it. But hopefully this doesn't sound too confusing. My main point is that you can sort of chance it, float it, if you will, without actually having to pay any money for the first 2 months. And so if only 2 months are passing between the time that you are finishing one job and starting another, then essentially you don't have to worry about this. But what happens if you're taking 3 months off, right? What happens if you finish your training or you're leaving your job on June 30th or July, whatever time you're leaving your job, and you're waiting 3 months to start your next job? Like, what do you do for health insurance? Okay, so since the first 2 months are free, essentially, if you want to think about it that way, because you can activate COBRA retroactively, starting starting the third month, you got to figure out what you're going to do. All right, so what are your options? Number one, you can hop on your spouse's plan. So if you are married and your spouse has a job that offers health insurance, you can have your spouse add you as part of their coverage. Now, usually when people are adding folks to their health insurance plans, they have to do so during a period called open enrollment, which is usually in the fall. But there are certain quote unquote special enrollment cases that allow you to add people throughout the year. And people transitioning job, losing jobs, switching jobs is one of those special enrollment periods. So essentially, your spouse, if you are married, can add you onto their health insurance coverage. So that's something that you can do. The other thing that you can do is actually pay for COBRA. So you would pay for the full cost of your prior employer's health insurance plan. So you can do that. That's expensive. The option that most people end up doing and the option that I did was actually going on the federal marketplace and buying health insurance, like Obamacare, for lack of a better word, or the Affordable Care Act, or however you want to phrase it. But I essentially went to healthcare.gov and put in my information and essentially purchased health insurance coverage off the federal marketplace. And you don't have to purchase it for like a year. You can just say it's going to be on like a month-to-month basis. And when I was transitioning from fellowship before I started my attending job, because I wasn't working, I had an income of zero. And so it was essentially like subsidized. I think I ended up paying like $300 a month or something, which is like not zero. I get it. So if you're not used to paying for health insurance, even paying $300 a month seems expensive, but like that's way cheaper than what COBRA would have cost me, which was like $1,000 a month. Now, it wasn't this super fancy health insurance plan, but I think it was like some silver or bronze plan off the federal marketplace that basically if I ended up getting hospitalized or something, they would cover the cost. And so you got to figure out what you're going to do for health insurance. Like I said, most people, they quote unquote get the first 2 months for free. If they end up needing health insurance, they'll retroactively activate COBRA. After that, you can get health insurance at your new employer. You can buy health insurance off the federal marketplace. You can sign up for health insurance through your spouse. But those are kind of your main options. But you got to figure out what you're doing for health insurance coverage. Okay, the next thing that you have to do is prepare for the cash flow gap. What in the world do I mean by that? I alluded to this earlier in the episode, but essentially when you are switching jobs, especially if you are moving and switching jobs, there are a lot of expenses related to that. And I don't just mean like moving expenses, right? But I also mean like credentialing expenses, licensing costs. You might have to pay for your medical license. Like I'm a physician, I have to pay for my medical license, and that is not cheap. You may pay for the cost of renewing your medical license if you already have it. You usually have to pay to renew it every 2 or 3 years. You may have to pay for your DEA license that allows you to prescribe medications. You may have to pay for your board certification fees, whether that's to take the board certification test or each year when those board certification fees are due. You may have to pay for your specialty specific fees. So I'm family medicine and sports medicine. So I have to each year pay quote unquote dues to the American Academy of Family Physicians or the American Medical Society for Sports Medicine. And so you might have a lot of those fees. And let me tell you, those things add up, especially when you're in a place where you're not necessarily working. I think they end up being like thousands of dollars. Now, different states have different costs. When I renew my medical license in Georgia every 2 years, it's like $250 or $300, something very like not that much. Versus when I renew my California medical license, that thing's like $1,200. I don't even know. Anyway, makes me mad every time. I'm thinking about letting it lapse, but that's another conversation. Anyway, my point is that it may cost different amounts in different states for these different fees and these different credentialing costs. Usually your employer will reimburse you for a good majority of these costs, but you still might have to pay for it up front. And so just be aware of that. I mentioned earlier delayed paychecks. I mentioned earlier you might have moving expenses and all of that. So just make sure that you have track of when is your last paycheck, when are you getting your next paycheck, that sort of thing. Now, sometimes people will say, Lisha, I still need money. And I'll probably do a whole podcast on different side gags and how I kind of help residents with the transition of getting money. But, realize that there are some options of side gigs and personal loans and things like that. And no, it's not a scam. I know we've all been scammed from people texting us and calling us randomly about, oh, sign up for a personal loan. But for physicians in transition, there's a different way that you can do that through some verified companies that a lot of people have utilized. I won't go into all of that today, but if you're interested, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm happy to hook you up. My email is the podcast email, wealthmindedmd@gmail.com. But my point is to prepare for the cash flow gap. Don't be surprised. All right. The next thing that you need to do is make sure that you set your new life up correctly. This might even be its own episode that I'll do at some point where I'll delve into all of these details. But I find that when people are starting new jobs, oftentimes they are so annoyed, frustrated, burned out by all the credentialing paperwork that they sort of rush through the financial paperwork that is really important. And that means when they're filling out the new tax forms to figure out how much to withhold from their paychecks, when they need to fill out, or maybe they don't even do it, is the beneficiary designations for life insurance or disability insurance policies that your employer is giving you. Maybe they they need to choose a health insurance plan and they're not really looking into all the different health insurance plans at their new jobs. And so they're just kind of like choosing one and moving on. You might think that one health insurance plan is the best. And then you look at the details and you realize actually it's not that great. And I'll give you an example. Like at my current job, actually, our high deductible health plan sucks. And that's unfortunate because I wanted to select a high deductible health plan so that I can open up a health savings account and invest money through that account. But unfortunately, our high deductible health plan is not that great. And so I didn't end up selecting it, and I have a regular health insurance plan. But that means now that I'm not eligible to open up an HSA account, and so all of that stuff. And so had I not delved into the details of the plan, I might have just assumed, oh, high deductible, that's the best plan that'll allow me to invest money through an HSA account. That's the one I should select. But by looking through the details, I realized, hey, that is the general rule of thumb, but that's not the case for me in the health insurance plan options that I have available through me at my job. And so you want to make sure that you are looking at that paperwork and making sure that you're selecting the right plan for you. And also thinking about, am I going to utilize a lot of healthcare this year? Are you someone who's thinking of expanding your family, getting pregnant, freezing your eggs, having surgical procedures? If that's the case, then maybe you don't want a high deductible plan. Maybe you want a low deductible plan so that you pay less money out of pocket. And so just really thinking about making sure that you are filling out those forms correctly, including your health insurance forms. And the other thing I wanted to mention with setting up your new financial life correctly is making sure that you are looking into the designations for any work retirement plans that may be available to you. If you work for a for-profit institution, it's going to be called a 401k. If you work for a nonprofit, it's going to be called a 403b. If you work for the military, it's going to be called the TSP or the Thrift Savings Plan. If you are self-employed and you're doing locums work, then maybe you can set up your own retirement plan called a solo 401k. So they have different names, right? But you want to make sure that you are setting that up correctly. I tell a lot of the residents and fellows that see me and interact with me on a regular basis that if you did one thing with your financial life, and that was to contribute the maximum to work retirement accounts each year, you will retire a multimillionaire, right? But in order to do that, you have to set it up correctly because it's not the default at a lot of employers, right? A lot of employers might have a default option of having you invest 3% each year into the work retirement plans or 5%, but you want to make sure that you are contributing the maximum if you can afford it, which a lot of physicians, most people making multiple six figures per year should be able to afford that, right? But they're not just going to tell you that. It's not like a click of a button, contribute the maximum each year. You have to figure it out yourself. And usually the general rule of thumb is to take whatever the yearly maximum contribution is, which for employees that are under the age of 50 in 2026, that number is $24,500. And you divide that by whatever your salary is. So maybe your salary is $250,000. Maybe your salary is $300,000. Maybe your salary is $100,000. I don't know. But you take the yearly maximum, which is $24,500, and you divide it by your salary. And then you multiply by 100. And that will give you the percentage that you need to have taken out of your paycheck each pay period in order to contribute the maximum to that work retirement account each year. And so you want to make sure that you're setting that up. If you right now have a lot of other expenses, things going on where you can't afford to contribute the maximum, at least contribute enough to get the match at your job. And you need to make sure that you are aware of when you are eligible to start contributing to those plans. Some jobs make you eligible to start contributing to those plans from day one. Other jobs, they make you work there for 30 days or 90 days before you're eligible. So make sure that you are reading the fine print on that. Other docs or high income earners may have access to something called a 457B plan. It is similar to a retirement plan, but technically is not one. It's a pre-tax plan that allows you to invest more money each year, but you need to look into the fine print. Brittany and I think, did an entire episode on 457B accounts. We'll try to link that in the show notes so you can figure out what questions to ask to know if this is an investment account that you should consider or not. But making sure that you set these things up correctly. I cannot tell you how many people do not set this up correctly, forget that it exists, never change it from year to year. I run into people that didn't even know that they had money taken out of their paycheck each month for retirement accounts. In fact, people at my own institution, right? Some of the residents and fellows, they didn't realize that the way we set things up, or the way the human resources department set things up, is that they automatically had like 3 or 5% taken out of their paychecks each pay period. And most of them never changed it. And so they were pleasantly surprised at graduation when I told them, hey, you have thousands of dollars, likely tens of thousands of dollars in your work 403B accounts. This is how you access it. This is where it is. They were like, oh, thank you. This is very helpful. Thanks, Dr. Taylor. And so if that is you, just making sure that you're setting things up correctly, making sure you know where the account is housed. Is it at Vanguard? Is it at Fidelity? Is it TD Ameritrade or Charles Schwab? Like, where is your work retirement account even held? How do you change the investment options if that's something that you choose to do? How do you check your balance? How do you take a loan from that money if you need the money for an emergency? What happens if you cash it out? Like, all of these things, you need to make sure that you are aware of where that money is and how you can access it. So that's my last thing, is just making sure that you set your new life up correctly. The easiest time to build good financial habits is before your first paycheck arrives. The easiest time to kind of set things up is before that paycheck arrives. And I want to make sure that you're doing that. And then as we're talking about paychecks, one of the things that I've been trying to tell my residents and my fellows and physician colleagues is to make sure that you are aware of what your paycheck will actually be. And I know that sounds crazy, right? How could you not know how much you're making? But I find that it's not that people don't know how much money they're bringing in. It's literally like they don't understand how much money is hitting their bank account. Because remember, like obviously the amount that you make is different from the amount that's being deposited in your bank account every so often, because you've got to account for taxes that are being withheld from your paycheck. You've got to account for any health insurance premiums that are being withheld from your paycheck. You have to account for any retirement contributions that are being withheld from your paycheck. And sometimes I'll tell the residents and fellows, hey, it's not uncommon for it to be 50%. Maybe on your paycheck, you're getting $8,000 every 2 weeks or $10,000 every 2 weeks or whatever the amount is, but what's being deposited is 50% of that. Because by the time you account for your taxes, by the time you account for retirement contributions, by the time you account for health insurance premiums, you may only have about 50% or 60% left. And so making sure that you are aware of how much money can I actually expect to hit my bank account, and is the right amount hitting my bank account? I know a couple of residents who didn't fill out their tax forms correctly, and so they weren't having any tax taken out of their paychecks, and they were surprised when they had a large bill tax season April 15th. Other folks had too much taken out of their paycheck, and so they got a refund when they filed their taxes, but they were like, man, I could have actually used this money throughout the year. Other people are really surprised when they switch states and switch jobs. I know when I lived in California, state taxes were really high. The state income tax was up to 13%. I am originally from Florida. There was no state income tax, so that was 0%. Now I live in Georgia and it's like a little under 5%. So again, just being aware of the different tax levels that you might be subjected to based on where you work, and also how you work. If you are self-employed, you're going to be responsible for paying the employee side of FICA taxes, aka Social Security and Medicare, in addition to the employer side. So the amount of money that you pay in FICA taxes, aka Social Security and Medicare taxes, is going to be double what somebody who's employed is paying. And so you want to make sure that you're accounting for that and that you're aware of all of the things that are being taken out of your paycheck so that you can better plan about how you're going to utilize your paycheck, so you have a better sense of, okay, how much can I afford to spend on housing or food or investments or student loan repayments or whatever. Hopefully this is helpful. This is your wake-up call mid-year sort of check-in, especially for those who might be in transition. I mentioned in the future I might have an episode on different side gigs that you can pursue. Brittany and I are probably going to record an episode on student loan updates because I know that that's been chaos lately. And, I'll have some other episodes coming up with some interviews with some really interesting docs from a career perspective. But as I mentioned at the top of this podcast, I also want to hear from you. So if you would love to have a conversation with me and help me inspire others by talking about how you're making money, how you're spending money, how you're investing money, I would love to have you on. So shoot me an email at wealthmindedmd@gmail.com. Alrighty. And now before I close out, now it's time for some fun money. I have been spending a lot of money on my nieces and nephews because we've got all these little kid parties and their birthdays are coming up. But one of the things that I bought for myself are some new wedge sandals. It's summertime. I am traveling. I'm hanging out with girlfriends and friends and family. And I love a good wedge sandal because it gives me a little height without hurting my feet too much. I'm not the tallest person. I'm only 5'5", and most people in my family are like above 6 feet. So I am short compared to them, and I have a lot of tall friends. And so I don't know, it makes me feel better when I'm got a little bit of height. And so I just purchased some new wedge sandals, and actually I'm excited to purchase some other cute little summer shoes or whatever. So yeah, that's something fun that I am doing with money. Thanks for listening. Hopefully you found this episode helpful, and I cannot wait to come back to you again next week.
Hello, everybody. It's me, Brooke. I'm recording a little disclaimer for Dr. Lisha Taylor. Just so you know, she's not a financial advisor, tax professional, lawyer, or financial planner. Everything you hear is for education and entertainment. It's not strict financial advice, So use your best judgment. Chat with a tax professional and all those other people that you need to talk to. Thanks for tuning in today. Keep cruising on your journey to wealth and wellness. Bye-bye.